Good afternoon. I would really like to welcome you to the Congressional Briefing on HR 6552, which is the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victim Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act. My name is Christy Wells, and I'm the CEO of Safe House Project, and we really have the honor of leading a national coalition of more than 400 anti-trafficking organizations, corporations, business leaders, and survivor leaders who have come together to show their support for this comprehensive and bipartisan legislation, which is really a whole of government approach designed to strengthen and expand and create new initiatives to protect victims, prosecute traffickers, and prevent trafficking. Today, we're going to be briefed by staff members from Representative Smith and Representative Bass's office, who are the co-sponsors of this legislation. And we are going to hear from survivor leader Tanya Gould and Bill Wolf, who is the former acting director at the U.S. Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime, who will share their perspective on the importance of this bill. So to get us started, first I would like to welcome Mary Vigil, who is the legislative director for Congressman Smith. Mr. Smith is the author of the original Trafficking Victim Protection Act of 2000, and Mary has previously worked with the U.S. Agency for International Development lead on counter-trafficking in persons, but has also worked on anti-trafficking efforts since 1995. So Mary, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking time, and I will turn the floor over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Christy. And thank you to Safe House. And again, especially to you, Christy and Brittany and Bill, for organizing and inviting us to this event to share about the importance of anti-trafficking legislation and funding. As Christy mentioned, I have the honor to work for Representative Chris Smith, who hired me back in May for the sole purpose of drafting to lead the drafting of the reauthorization legislation, which is what we're here to talk about. And this legislation is to reauthorize the funding and strengthen programs to combat human trafficking. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history, a little bit about the background of the trafficking bill, as well as to go into some of the progress that it's made over the years. And then we'll lead right into our current legislation that has been introduced. So, and the landmark Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 was authored by Mr. Smith, also known as the TVPA of 2000. Mr. Smith was the very first member of the United States Congress to approach and pass legislation addressing this issue. He started his advocacy in the 1990s, impassioned by his meetings with trafficking survivors. It may come as a surprise today that when he first approached this topic in Congress, he was met with a wall of skepticism and opposition. His proposal to pass a law to address human trafficking domestically and abroad was dismissed by many as a solution in search of a problem. Several members of Congress turned him down when he asked them to co-sponsor the bill. For many people at that time, including lawmakers, the term trafficking applied almost exclusively to drugs and weapons, not human beings. Reports of vulnerable persons, especially women and children, being reduced to commodities for sale were often met with surprise or indifference. But Mr. Smith did persist, and after 2 years, he mustered enough votes from both parties to pass the TVPA, and the bill was finally signed into law on October 28th, 2000. The TVPA has made a lot of progress over these past 22 years. It has shaped the U.S. government's strategy toward eliminating trafficking and supporting victims. It established an approach still used today that I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, known as the 3 Ps: prevention of trafficking in the first place, protection for victims, and prosecution of the traffickers. This bill created a new whole of government, domestic and international approach and strategy to establish numerous programs and reforms to be able to do and act upon the 3 Ps to prevent trafficking, again, protect victims and prosecute traffickers. One of the most important reforms was a shift from treating those who have experienced trafficking as criminals to victims of a crime perpetrated by their traffickers. It also defined a victim of trafficking as anyone recruited, harbored, transported, or obtained for the purpose of a commercial sex act or for labor of services, through the use of force, fraud, or coercion, again, for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. Now, the TVPA created also several different offices that many of us here today are familiar with, including the president's and efforts, offices and efforts, including the U.S. State Department's Trafficking in Persons Office, also the president's Interagency Task Force to monitor and combat trafficking in persons. And then, as many of us may be familiar with, there's also this annual Trafficking in Persons report as well that has a tier grading of every nation's record in making serious and sustained efforts to eliminate human trafficking. And so this report card, if you will, is something that even the United States is graded on. And interestingly, those who are, of course, marked as a tier 3, so there's 3 tiers, tier 1, well, 4, tier 1, tier 2, the tier 2 watch list, and then tier 3. The tier 3 are where the egregious violators are then subject to US sanctions. Now, thousands of human traffickers have been prosecuted and jailed pursuant to this act, including all charges brought against Jeffrey Epstein and the infamous convictions involving the Smallville actress Allison Mack. Now, the law has been updated and reauthorized several times since its original passage in 2000, and 4 of these laws were authored by Mr. Smith, and most recently, he and Ms. Bass introduced the Bill HR 6552, titled the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act of 2022. This bill reauthorizes a total of approximately $1 billion over 5 years for anti-trafficking efforts. It enhances successful programs like the grants to assist in the recognition of child trafficking by adding prevention of online grooming and trafficking of children, which we know because of the issues that we had with COVID, how there was a spike in this online grooming and trafficking of children. So this has become even more germane to our times right now. And we also even renamed this particular grant program after the great Frederick Douglass, known for his leadership to combat slavery from back then. And as we are trying to apply that to today as what we know trafficking to be as modern day slavery. And that is also why we've also named this bill that we introduced this year, as well as the previous authorization from 2019, also naming after Frederick Douglass. And some of the even provisions that we have in this bill, just to kind of talk a little bit about the legacy of this with Frederick Douglass, is that the particular one about the grants to prevent child trafficking was actually also written together with Frederick Douglass's great-great-great-grandson, Kenneth Morris. So we're tying all these things together from the history and also looking at ways in which we can build upon things as we go forward. So the bill also, when we talk about this and how we're building forward, what's really important too is to adapt the best practices, such as making sure that these programs are accessible, they're age appropriate, trauma informed, and that they're scalable, because we want these programs to be sustainable. And so we want to use tested and proven best practices. We also strengthen laws to prevent and identify and report child sex and labor trafficking, but also we want to ensure that survivor empowerment education programs are also available so that survivors can, as they go along in their own journeys, that they're also able to receive resources and opportunities for them to be able to receive mental health care. So there's a case management piece with the wraparound social services, but also other sorts of training like life skills, as well as professional development training as well, and helping them obtain education and employment. We also talk about strengthening federal government accountability for survivor-informed policy, and which, and without me going too much and elaborating on all these things, I know that my colleague from Ms. Bass's office, Tomekah, will elaborate momentarily on these areas as well. But I really want to take the time to just reiterate that it was the survivors' voices in the 1990s that drove the original bill and continues to do so today. And it is their voice that makes a difference and makes a bill a good bill. And even though we have to continuously update to make sure that we're keeping with the times, because as we all know, traffickers are very clever and they adapt very easily, and they are entrepreneurial that way. And they take advantage of vulnerable situations. And again, they're opportunistic. So we also have to adapt to that and also try to stay ahead and predict what they're going to do, and try to provide the safeguards in place so that we can avoid and deter them from trafficking vulnerable people. That said, going back to the survivors, again, just reiterating, the survivors are the real experts. Their lived experiences and their perspectives make them leaders, and also make it critical that they inform our policies and our legislation so that we can make it truly effective. And so this partnership that we have between the lawmakers, survivors, as well as with the various branches in government, as well as with the NGOs, all of you, is very critical, because this is not only a whole of government, but it's a true team approach domestically and internationally to really combat this horrible crime. And with that said too, again, survivor engagement is important to build this effective victim-centered, trauma-informed, survivor-informed kind of strategies and programs. And I'm really happy to see that, we've got Tanya Gold, who will be speaking later on as well, who I've had the pleasure of meeting at least a couple of times. So really excited that she's here. Also, to mention, the timing of this Frederick Douglass Reauthorization Act is very important. It expired last September of 2021. Now, after 2 years of contending with the COVID-19 pandemic, as I mentioned before, it has changed our lives in many ways. And as I said, traffickers are opportunistic and they look for vulnerabilities. And so we know that as a result of COVID, it has made a serious impact on anti-trafficking efforts and on patterns of trafficking and on victims and survivors. So we must step up our efforts, and again, find ways in which we could address these issues, but also try to stay ahead of them as well. And so this reauthorization of this bill, the Frederick Douglass bill, the Smith-Bass Frederick Douglass bill, is a way to do that. And we worked very hard together in a very bipartisan fashion to do this. And this bill that we have for 2022, this one is a result of that effort in trying to ensure that this bill and the over $1 billion of funding actually gets through, because we want all of you to be able to continue to do the good work that you're doing. And a way for us to do that is to get this bill passed, and as soon as possible, to get this bill to the House floor, get it passed, but it has to be waved out of committees first, then go to the House floor, get it passed, go to the Senate side. So then, eventually then it gets signed into law, so that the money we can ensure that the money continues to flow, so all of you can continue to do your good work. But this is critical for that to happen. Again, we are very hopeful about this newest reauthorization, that this will do the job. Again, worked very hard to make sure that that it's bipartisan, and that the pieces that are in it are ones that everyone can agree with. So that said, we are the only reauthorization bill that has been introduced into Congress. And as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Smith is the only Congress member that has actually hired someone to specifically lead the drafting of that for his office, and to work together with other members for that. And so it's just important to keep in mind that, we're working hard. And Ms. Bass, of course, who's been a champion with us, and both she and Mr. Smith have worked well together on these issues for several years, and both are very passionate about these issues, and work as a team to try to combat this horrible crime. And so all that to say is, again, I want to just thank Safe House for putting this event together. And it is events like this that contribute to these efforts. And we're so grateful for this opportunity to talk about this bill. And again, thank you for including us on this. And it's my pleasure now to introduce my colleague, who is representing Ms. Bass's office, again, who is our partner in this legislation. And so Tomekah Burl, she is the staff director of the House Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, and Global Human Rights, which is chaired by Congressman Karen Bass. Her past experiences as a diplomat, serving overseas in China, Iraq, and Africa, as well as in Washington, D.C. And we're very grateful to have her here, as well as her own expertise in this area, to talk a little bit about this bill.
Thank you so much, Mary. Tomekah is having some technical difficulties, and so she is working to get on here with us, but we are going to keep rolling for the moment. And so but Mary, thank you for that briefing, for that overview, for the work that yourself and Representative Bass have done for decades to really work to prevent trafficking, protect the vulnerable, prosecute traffickers. So we are so grateful to you and to your office for all of the work that is done year over year. We know that this is an ongoing effort. This is not a one and done. So thank you for all that you do. Now, I am excited to bring on Tanya Gould. Tanya is a survivor leader, and she is a presidential award recipient for her extraordinary efforts to combat trafficking in person. Tanya, welcome, and we're so grateful to hear you and your perspective on this bill and the importance of its passage for the survivor community.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. Thank you, Safe House, for hosting this event, and thank you, Mary. It's so good to see you. We've had just a few interactions together, and I'm so grateful and hopeful, and just thankful for your work that you've done on this. And thank you to all of you who are here. It means a lot to have allies, especially government officials, to show up in these spaces because we need you. So today I'm here to speak on behalf and in support of this reauthorization. And I want to send a special thanks to Mr. Smith of New Jersey, I'm from New Jersey. I was born and raised in New Jersey. So thankful for him and Ms. Bass and Mr. McCall for introducing the bill. I want to thank you for the care and support over the years just to make the issues of human trafficking a priority. I just want to acknowledge your passion and determination on this issue. So thank you. We see you and appreciate how important this is to you. So we've accomplished so much. So when I think of our timeline on this, I'm grateful for our engagement, the push, the meaningful conversations, the messing up and making it right. That's our job, and that's the job of policymakers. It's appropriate to learn and evaluate and evolve. So it is important not to lose ourselves to what we are here for. And we are here for the people. We are here to create possibilities and fill the gaps, and to make sure that in doing so, we never miss the most vulnerable among us. I believe that we can test or measure the true nature of our nation by how we treat the most vulnerable among us. Survivors of human trafficking fit that definition. And in order to understand our growth, we must face our weaknesses. Traffickers are okay with studying and filling that gap. So we must do everything we can to protect our citizens, our children, our legacies, and we must leave no one behind. As a leader in this issue, a survivor leader, I am so blessed to have worked alongside survivor leaders, federal and state governments, survivor-led anti-trafficking organizations, nationally recognized organizations, law enforcement, and so many other allies to strategize and be recognized as a leader and expert. So it's important for you to understand the hope and joy of this recognition. See, as a victim, I was looked at as low or degrading, hopeless. I had to work hard to believe in myself and my own sense of dignity and strength. So now I'm filled with hope, worthy and able to move forward with a layer upon layer approach. This is the kind of work the TVPA has done. It has given the opportunity for allies to partner with survivor leaders and those with lived experience. Survivors get to advise and consult in the area of health, economic development, education, governance, democracy, housing, prevention, and so much more. As a survivor leader, I want to encourage you to understand the importance of supporting this work, supporting the work of the National Human Trafficking Hotline, supporting the work of the Advisory Council on Human Trafficking, which in this speaks specifically about extending sunset until 2031. So I just want to stop for a moment and give a plug for our Survivor Advisory Council, which I'm a part of. We are a team of amazing leaders who work so passionately to make sure our nation can put into practice what we talk about. We have an amazing relationship with the TIP office and the Interagency Task Force. We can comfortably discuss the issues we see on the ground or issues we personally have had to confront as a lived experience. We can easily discuss and address gaps and feel confident that our voices are being heard and that we will continue a meaningful partnership. This proves that supporting victims is key. Take a look at the work of survivor leaders everywhere. Every single place you find survivor leadership, there you will find first a place or agency or organization that supports survivors and the most beautiful, innovative strategies that truly fulfills the need for promising practices. Isn't it amazing to support, as a government, people who were once considered deplorable, to taking that same person and saying, hey, you are a part of our history and we will support your work because you are worthy. So we still have so much to do on the prevention side of trafficking. I remain close to the ground and witness the amount of trafficking that continues to happen to our minors. And this is unacceptable. I mean, it really is. We must prioritize the people of America's future, which is our children. They will be the ones to lead our nation. And this is what I want. I would like them to lead without having to deal with the trauma from childhood trauma, as many of us had to do. We can end this cycle. I'm hopeful because my life proves it. The lives of so many survivors. It's proof that we can learn from history. It's proof that we can end negative cycles and habits that keep some of this in place. Well, thank you for your attention. Thank you for hearing my voice. Thank you for a seat at the table. Thank you for supporting those with lived experiences. Thank you for making efforts to further and deepen our work together. And so my closing statement, I just want you to remember, is that yes, we've done a lot together, but we still have so much more work to do. Thank you for your time.
Tanya, thank you so much. It's always just an honor to hear your perspective. And I love the way that you are leading with so many other survivors to really elevate this issue and help Congress and other legislators understand how they can really create effective policies in order to support survivors. So thank you for all that you do. We are able to have Tomekah with us now. So Tomekah Burl is, as Mary had said earlier, is the staff director of the House Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health and Global Human Rights, chaired by Congresswoman Karen Bass. She was her past experience is that she served as a diplomat overseas in China, Iraq, and Africa, as well as Washington, D.C. So Tomekah, we would love for you to come on and share.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Oh, fantastic. Deepest apologies for the technological difficulties. I'm very sad not to be on camera and to have missed some of the remarks for the other panelists. But I'm delighted to be here, and I bring the greetings of Representative Karen Bass, who is extremely excited to be promoting the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act. The importance of this particular piece of legislation is that it has an impact globally that affects every aspect of humanity. And when we talk about global health and global human rights, and we talk about what we want our world to look like, the United States has a major leadership role in being able to craft that picture. So it's important for the U.S. to stand against human trafficking. And this particular bill does just that. It allows us to put our action where our talk is. This bill, if when extended, offers $1 billion to support the protections of those who are victims to human trafficking. It expands provisions and creates stronger laws to protect victims that include temporary housing, sensitization of educators and law enforcement personnel, guardians, and children to recognize, respond, and prevent trafficking in children. It also requires greater accountability measures to ensure that those who are trafficked are protected while appropriately penalizing traffickers. To the statement of the trafficker survivors, the leaders in the space who know all too well of the horrors of the situations and the circumstances created by the traffickers. Sorry, I can't manage here. But to you all as survivors, thank you so much for being brave and coming forward. And what this particular bill does is it looks at who is vulnerable and it tries to help other people identify them. Often in the United States, many people don't realize that we have our own trafficking issues. And the people who are most vulnerable tend to be children and women. This act therefore calls for support survivors by partnering with non-governmental providers of social services to provide access to school, professional development, mental health care, and give survivors the tools they need to escape and to break the vicious cycle of trafficking. One of the provisions most important to Ms. Bass is the provision of housing. What this particular provision does is it creates an opportunity and a space for those who have fallen victim to actually be able to get their own resources, go and seek shelter in an organized space, so that they are not having to make decisions that force them into the situations that they were running from. When they have a place to go to escape the trafficker, in this particular housing circumstances, they don't have to become desperate enough to return to their prior situation. The Reauthorization of the Act and the housing assistance and grants for vulnerable people is one of the most important sections to Ms. Bass, of course, including everything else, that basically provides a sense of ownership over one's own circumstances. As you know, traffickers do not discriminate. They seek the most vulnerable, regardless of age, race, ethnicity, gender, nationality, background, or geographical location. As a result, we have to protect those, particularly children, those in the child welfare and juvenile justice system, runaway and homeless youth, migrant laborers, minorities, those with disabilities, and LGBTQI+ individuals. We hope that the reauthorization of this act, we hope that this act is reauthorized first. And we know that with the changes that have been made, it will simply make the system and make the options and the choices of those who have fallen victim, and it will amplify the prevention methods to decrease this number of people who are suffering these indignities across the globe over time. Again, thank you and apologies for my technical difficulties.
Thank you so much, Tomekah, for joining us, for sharing that. We just honor you and Congresswoman Bass for the work that you all have done in this space to respond to America's efforts to combat trafficking. I would now like to welcome Bill Wolf. Bill is the former acting director of the U.S. Department of Justice's Office for Victims of Crime, and he is Safe House Project's Director of Policy. And so, Bill, I would love for you to come on.
Yeah, thank you, Christy, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where in the world you are. And just what an incredible opportunity to hear from two true champions, Congresswoman Bass's office and Congressman Smith, both really putting the effort and care into ensuring human rights all over the world. And this bill truly is critical. I can tell you, as a former practitioner, as a police officer that was assigned to run a human trafficking task force, the reality of human trafficking is real. here in the United States and abroad. But we need the support. We need all of the tools and resources that the Trafficking Victims Protection Act provides to those practitioners. I was fortunate to go on to serve as the acting director at the Office for Victims of Crime, where we oversaw the more than $85 million worth of federal funding that is given out to nonprofit organizations all across the country every year. This funding is vital to ensuring that survivors are given access to the services that they deserve. As you've heard from my other colleagues today, what they experience, what survivors experience, is an atrocity. It's unfortunate, to say the least. And this is why we need to make sure that they're afforded those particular that access to services that they so deserve, and to make sure that those services are of the highest quality. You know, so many stakeholders, and I was one of them many years ago, that are working in this space don't realize really how, what's the saying, how the sausage is made, right? We don't really understand what goes on behind the scenes. But it's really this one piece of legislation that drives the whole of government response, that provides, as I said, all the tools and resources necessary for those in the field to be able to do the work that they're doing. And if this bill is not reauthorized, all of that is taken away. More than 20 years worth of work and progress in this space is halted as we wait for this bill to be reauthorized. As we mentioned, there's no reason for it to not be reauthorized. But unfortunately, Congress has a lot going on. There's a lot of things going on in the world today. And I think a lot of people don't realize how important their voice truly is. And so, again, I'm very thankful for the opportunity to come before you all today with really a call to action. And that call to action is for you all to realize and understand that you play a key role in ensuring that these tools and resources are made available. You all play a key role in ensuring that the work of Congressman Smith, the work of Congresswoman Bass, is able to be enacted into law and continue forward in our fight to end human trafficking. Human trafficking oftentimes seems like such a large issue, one that some of us back away from or think, we really don't have a role to play, especially when it comes to legislation. But you all play a role. And so I'd encourage each and every one of you today to pick up the phone or send an email to your representative. As a representative of your organization, as a stakeholder in this space, to let them know that this is important and you want to see it go through and get to the House floor for a vote, or even as an individual, a constituent, somebody that has a stake in the game. Let your representatives know that this bill is important to you and that you want to see it passed so that we can provide the protection, the prosecution, and ultimately the prevention of human trafficking as we move forward. So thank you all, and I'll turn it back over to Christy, and I think we've got a couple minutes for questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bill, and to all of our panelists, just for your incredible perspective and just for taking time to educate the rest of us on this legislation, on the importance of its passage, and really the things that can happen really if it doesn't get passed. So one of the great questions that came through, I think, is, Mary, this will probably come over to you, which is just, how fast can this legislation get passed? What are the steps that need, I know you mentioned it before, but walk us through again, what are the steps that need to be taken, and how can the people here show their support?
Great, thank you, Christy. And thank you also everyone for being active and giving us your questions. So that's a great question. How fast can a bill really pass? Now, there could be a variety of situations where it could happen very quickly. What I will tell you more germane for this conversation, for this bill, is that at the stage that it's at, it already was passed by unanimous voice vote out of its primary referred committee, which was the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So unanimously passed out of that committee, again, by voice vote without amendments. Now we do have 4 other committees that our bill was referred to. If we are able to get the heads of those committees to waive our bill out of their committees, it could then go onto the floor. But we also know, the way, a very easy way this could also work is if the speaker has a lot of power in this regard too as well. So if we do get a lot of good combined support there, we could even get the bill onto the floor for a vote, this month. Again, if we were able to mass enough support from the various committee chairs, as well as ranking members and from the speaker as well. So the leadership support, I can't begin to tell you, is critical in order to get this bill onto the House floor and then once it gets to the House floor for a vote and passes, then it would go to the Senate side. Then they have their own process somewhat similarly. Again, this bill will go to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and they would have their own process as well. And then once it gets passed through the Senate, then it would get signed into law. So out of the House versus out of Congress. So just so you know, so it's in the House now, then it would have to go to the Senate, then it passes from Congress onto the desk of our president, who then would make the decision to sign it into law. So I would feel kind of optimistically, I'm always very optimistic. I would love to see this particular bill get on the floor this month and get it over to the Senate side, and then do this full force effort to get the Senate to also vote it as quickly as possible onto the desk of the president. So that could be, I would imagine, if we could amass enough support, it could be a matter of a couple of months. But again, it all depends on these different factors. Mainly having leadership support, I think, is very critical. And I don't know if Tomekah, would you like to add to that as well? You might have a different perspective and other things you might want to add to that.
Hi, Mary. Thank you for that very clear and excellent explanation of a very complicated and convoluted process. I would say that the timing is critical to the extent that both Rep. Bass and Rep. Smith would like this to be moved as quickly as possible. And with the support of the House and also with connections in the Senate, as well as connections to leadership, I think our goal is to go as fast as possible. And in Congress, there is a joke, it's like hurry up and wait. But I think in this particular instance, we can be optimistic, as Mary said, that in the next couple of months, we should at least have enough movement around the bill in its current state, i.e. out of the House, out of several of the referred committees, to get a better sense of timing. As Bill stated, on your part, for you all to amplify, it's important to amplify the importance of this law. It is important to talk to those with whom you have connections and sway in Congress, who and lend your support and say we would really like for this to get passed as soon as possible in order to protect and prevent this type of human trafficking.
And I would just like to emphasize what Tomekah was saying too, because stakeholder support, constituent support is really key. Your voices are so important in this regard. And so reaching out to, and again, particularly all of you as again, stakeholders and as constituents, you all have representatives and senators that you can reach out to as constituents to have your voices heard. And again, as an organization, as coalitions, you also have that voice to do so. And as we had said earlier on the call too, this bill expired September 30th of 21, so last year. And so we do want to get this passed quickly. It's the only reauthorization bill in Congress right now. And so, it's important to get this passed so that we can continue doing what we're doing, the good work that you all particularly are doing.
And, I just want to add that sometimes we can get complacent. And so now, we're hearing and seeing movement. And sometimes, just I think it can be natural for us to say, oh, we're good. But there's the work that still needs to be done, especially when it comes to prevention. It's big. And in order to have, we need this to happen for us so we can have funds to really equip. Now we can look and see, this is how much we've accomplished. So imagine, putting the same type of effort into prioritizing prevention. That's amazing. That's what we want, right? And so, I just encourage folks to not, become complacent and to continue the move. Matter of fact, keep it forward moving, but in a much deeper way. So we can, really, when we talk about ending, trafficking, I think it's possible. I really do. In order to do that, we really, really have to work together. We can't, slow the process on this.
That's wonderful. Thank you all for weighing in. Before we wrap up, I know there's a couple more questions, but we're actually going to work to respond to those via email, just because we want to make sure that you get kind of the full responses that we might not have time for at this point. But for our panelists, is there anything else that you would like to add in before we wrap this up?
I just want to thank everybody for taking the time on a Thursday afternoon, and just reiterate, we all play a role. We all play a part in moving this forward. Don't ever think that it's bigger than you are, because you may be that one phone call, that one email to your representative that pushes this bill over the finish line. And it's so critically important. I know we all can't stress that enough to get this passed through, so that we all have the tools and resources. So thank you all.
I'd also just like to reiterate just a gratitude to all of you, because, again, you all are key, and also to Safe House for organizing this. Mr. Smith and Representative Bass have worked really, really hard on trying to push this forward. And even so, I think there's a question at one point of someone asking about if we tried to reauthorize this bill before it expired, and we did. And so, again, we need all of you. You all are critical. And again, please don't underestimate your voice, and don't underestimate the work that you're all doing, right? Because you all are critical on so many fronts to get this legislation passed, but also on the area of being the frontline workers who are actually doing the work. And so, again, thank you for what you're doing, and also thank you for any support that you can provide.
Thank you. And I can definitely just reiterate, it just makes me think about a lot of issues that we see going on in our world, and they pop up on national news. Unfortunately, we don't get that kind of recognition, but this is something that affects us, in the trenches. It's something that has been happening for a really long time, and we would love to see it get national attention like that. And unfortunately, or for whatever reason, I don't know, but I know that we need you to do that. We need you to prioritize it. And so we just can't stress it enough. And I know there are things happening all over the world, and this is happening too. And, a lot of people are detached from it and don't realize how close it's happening, to your home, to your kids, nieces, nephews, grandbabies. This is something that is really happening, and we really need to get a handle on this finally. And so I'd like to see it happen in my lifetime. That would be wonderful. But thank you for having us, and thank you all for being here.
If I may, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for inviting me to be on the panel. Thanks for all the comments that have been made here. And thanks for those who are continuing in the fight. I think if there's anything to take away from this phone call is reach out to your congressional representatives, reach out to your White House, reach out to your Justice Department, reach out to your Department of Homeland Security, reach out to those areas and the State Department to talk about the issue that is affecting more people than we know, because they are voiceless. So become that voice that others don't have, and recognize that the major players are those who represent you in international organizations such as the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and contact them as well. This is an issue that crosses borders, that has ramifications for everyone. If you will, it is a humanization of the pandemic that we're currently hopefully exiting sometime soon. And the importance of it is, if one person is vulnerable, then we all are vulnerable. So as we think about that and close, be willing to lend voice to those who can't, be willing to teach those who don't understand and recognize, and be willing to learn so that we can help everyone in the space.
Thank you so much to each of you. A couple of final things. I've gotten a couple of notes with individuals asking if there will be a recording. We will be sending out a recording. Please share it with those that you know. There's also the link to the Safe House Project website, safehouseproject.org/freedom, where you have an opportunity to sign the letter of support, but also there are letters that you can download just with preset language that you can send to your congressional member. We encourage you to do that. There's a way to look up the contact information for your member and send that their way. So we invite you to not only do it, but also share this with others and invite maybe 3 other people to be part of this movement to show our support for this legislation. I will just end this by saying, Mary and Tomekah, thank you so much to you, to Representative Bass, to Representative Smith for the incredible work that they continue to do to combat trafficking around the world. We are so grateful for that. On behalf of the survivors that our organization has the opportunity of serving, we just say thank you. So we appreciate all of y'all's time. Have a blessed day, and we will be sending out this information soon.